We treat our daily routines a lot like gravity. We just take them completely for granted.
Oh, absolutely. We really do.
Right. I mean, you wake up, you head out the door to school, you come back, turn your key in the lock, and you are instantly secure. You expect the world to just, keep spinning.
Because your home is your safe space.
Exactly. But on June 5, 2000, a 15-year-old girl in Istanbul turned her key and walked into an absolute nightmare.
It is the literal definition of a mundane, predictable routine just suddenly shattering. And, when that sense of security breaks inside the home, it leaves a psychological mark that extends way beyond the immediate family.
It really does. It paralyzes an entire community. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today we are taking a really close look at the facts, the timeline, and the very frustrating evidence of a case that has defied explanation for over a quarter of a century.
Which is just a staggering amount of time.
It really is. We are examining one of Turkey's most heartbreaking and mysterious unsolved cases, the 2000 murder of 15-year-old Çağla Tuğaltay. And for you listening, our goal today isn't to drown you in, dry legal terminology or super heavy forensic jargon.
Right. We want to keep this accessible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to break this down simply, especially for younger listeners. We are going to walk through this chronologically, step by step, analyzing the timeline and the core uncertainties while keeping the human element right at the center.
Which is so vital. I mean, after 26 years, an open investigation can easily just morph into an abstract puzzle, becomes a stack of files or a cold case statistic.
Yeah, you lose the person behind the file.
Exactly. But we have to anchor this in the reality that a 15-year-old girl, a teenager, was brutally attacked in her ultimate safe space. We really have to approach this with empathy.
We do. And to truly grasp the gravity of a mystery that has lasted 26 years, we have to start on that very first day. We're looking at June 5, 2000.
Right.
The location is Fulya. Now, for those who don't know, Fulya is a well-established, bustling residential neighborhood in Istanbul. This isn't an isolated cabin in the woods.
No, not at all. It's a dense apartment building in a busy community where people live, raise families, go about their business.
Right. And Çağla was a high school student. The timeline the sources provide is incredibly tight. The event occurs shortly after she returns from school. She walked into her family home and her throat was slashed.
That phrase, shortly after returning from school, it dictates everything about how we understand this crime.
Because it's such a narrow window, right?
Exactly. In criminology, we look really closely at the concept of opportunity. This was a hyper-compressed window. This wasn't a crime committed in the dead of night while the whole city slept. This happened in the margins of a completely normal, sunlit afternoon.
I want you to think about that specific feeling of coming home from high school. You walk through the door, you drop your heavy bag, maybe head straight for the kitchen.
You're completely decompressing.
Yeah. It is arguably the most vulnerable, unguarded 5 minutes of a teenager's entire day. How does an attacker orchestrate a crime of this sheer brutality in that incredibly narrow window?
Well, it points to a terrifying level of either calculation or just pure brazenness.
Like you were waiting for her.
They had to be. The perpetrator either waited inside, followed her into the building, or used some pretext to gain immediate access the second she unlocked the door.
Wow.
But beyond the method of entry, what really stands out is the killer's chilling comfort level. To commit a highly personal, intensely violent act like this in a residential apartment building in broad daylight, it requires a perpetrator who feels entirely in control of their environment.
Like he owned the place.
Exactly. He acted like it was his own house, and he managed to completely vanish without being seen by anyone.
Which brings up one of the most haunting uncertainties of this entire case, the absolute silence of the surroundings. I mean, an attack of this magnitude involves a struggle. It involves chaos.
Yes, there would be noise.
Right. Yet the perpetrator somehow manages to commit this atrocity, act super comfortable, and then completely disappear without a single neighbor intervening. No one provided a definitive description.
It's baffling.
It really is. The neighbors basically played the three monkeys, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. The community essentially heard nothing and saw nothing.
It's what investigators often dread in urban crimes, honestly, the isolation of apartment living.
Even in a busy place like Fulya.
Oh, especially there. People are behind their doors, televisions are on, city noise filters through the windows. A killer can really exploit that ambient isolation.
That makes sense, I guess.
But that extreme violence injected into a safe suburban afternoon is psychologically devastating. If a teenager isn't safe locking her own front door on a weekday afternoon, the illusion of safety for the entire neighborhood just collapses.
So true. But there are also massive uncertainties surrounding the actual discovery of the scene. The timeline gets really muddy here.
It does.
So it's officially stated that she was found about an hour and a half later, right? But the forensic details paint a much more complicated picture.
They really do. The medical findings challenge that neat little timeline.
Right. Because there was a detail about a foamy liquid in her throat. Can you break that down in forensic terms for us? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, of course. So finding a frothy or foamy fluid in the airway is a very specific forensic indicator. It often points to pulmonary edema, which basically means fluid accumulating in the lungs.
Okay, and why does that happen?
Well, it frequently occurs during a prolonged struggle, severe trauma, or a process of asphyxiation. It suggests agonal respiration, which means she was gasping or struggling for breath for a period of time.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just instantaneous.
No, it likely wasn't. And that prolonged struggle means the actual time of death and the sequence of events might not line up perfectly with that simple 1.5-hour discovery window everyone talks about.
That is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And to make the mystery even more convoluted, you have the family statements.
Yes, the family dynamics.
I mean, the sources point out the never-ending contradictions from the family over the years. When the people closest to the victim constantly change their narratives or offer conflicting details, it just severely muddies the waters for the police.
It really does. It creates an investigative fog. But despite that fog, we do know she fought back. And in that struggle, she captured the single most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation.
The DNA under her fingernails.
Exactly. It is the ultimate application of Locard's exchange principle.
Which means what, exactly?
In forensic science, the principle states that every contact leaves a trace. You cannot interact with an environment, especially violently, without leaving a piece of yourself behind and taking a piece of it with you.
So Çağla, in her final moments, forced that exchange.
She did. She basically became her own crime scene investigator.
But this is where the story gets incredibly frustrating. Because, for anyone who grew up watching police shows, finding DNA under the victim's fingernails is supposed to be the definitive game over moment for the bad guy.
Right, the computer beeps, and you have your suspect.
Exactly. But here we are decades later, and the reason we are still here is due to what can only be described as a catastrophic failure by the police in how they handled that evidence.
It is one of the most critical errors in this entire case.
I was shocked when I read this. They didn't wait for the medical examiner to secure the evidence in a sterile environment, did they?
No, they didn't. Instead of waiting for the Institute of Forensic Medicine, the Adli Tıp, to carefully collect the evidence during the official autopsy, the regular police literally cut her fingernails right there at her house.
Wait, they just clipped her nails in the apartment?
Yes, they cut them at the scene. And then, instead of sending them straight to the Specialized Forensic Medicine Institute, those clippings were kept in the standard police criminal department.
That is just unbelievable. I mean, the contamination risks alone.
It's a worst-case scenario for biological evidence. DNA is incredibly sensitive. And because of how it was handled, they were only able to extract a very, very small, degraded fragment of a DNA profile.
So they don't even have a pristine, complete sample?
No. They have a tiny fragment. It's enough to clear someone if they aren't a match, but it is a very fragile piece of biological material to build a whole 26-year case around.
That just makes me so angry. Having a DNA fragment without a database match is already hard enough. It's like having a perfectly clear, high-resolution photograph of a fingerprint. But you live in a world where no one has ever been fingerprinted.
That's a great analogy.
You know exactly what the unique pattern looks like, but you have absolutely nothing to compare it against.
Right. A DNA sequence is just an abstract string of biological code. Unless that specific code is already sitting in a criminal registry because the offender was arrested for a previous crime, that DNA is just silent data sitting in a vial.
And because of that, this case has remained a faili masul, an unsolved case with an unknown perpetrator, since 2000.
Yes. Turkey's most mysterious unsolved murder.
And during that massive span of time, investigators have examined and tested literally thousands of suspects, Thousands.
Yeah. The sheer scale of that testing is monumental. It really represents an unparalleled logistical effort by the authorities to try and right the ship.
But I mean, I have to question the strategy there. Testing thousands of people in the immediate circle in the local neighborhood, it seems logical at first, right?
You start at the epicenter and work outward.
Exactly. But after swabbing a few hundred locals, let alone thousands, doesn't that inherently point to this being a stranger? Like a transient or a crime of pure opportunity?
You would think so.
Why sustain that level of intensity testing locals if the sheer volume of negative DNA results heavily suggests the killer just isn't from the immediate area? Doesn't the investigation eventually just create its own blind spots?
That is the inherent trap of geographic profiling. When an emotionally devastating crime occurs, human nature and, honestly, public pressure demands that the threat be identified locally.
People want to know who the monster next door is.
Exactly. There's this assumption that to navigate the building so comfortably and to vanish so seamlessly without the neighbors noticing, the killer simply must have known the layout.
So they just cast a massive net over the whole neighborhood.
A huge net. They test friends, extended family, neighbors, local delivery workers, anyone with a minor criminal record in the district.
But with zero matches.
Right. And you are entirely correct about the statistics. When you cross the threshold into testing thousands of individuals with zero matches, the probability shifts dramatically.
It has to be someone entirely off the radar.
It strongly suggests the perpetrator was highly mobile, maybe a transient worker, someone who immediately fled the city, or just someone whose life has never intersected with the justice system before or since.
And think about the immense investigational fatigue that creates. To test thousands of suspects means that thousands of times a detective had to chase down a lead, secure a biological sample, submit it to the lab, and then get a negative result.
It's a relentless, soul-crushing cycle of raised hopes and absolute disappointment.
Not just for the investigators, but for the family.
Oh, the psychological endurance required by the family is unfathomable. Even with all their contradictory statements, living through decades of dead-end tips and reopening wounds every time a new suspect is brought in, it completely erodes the spirit.
But the investigation persists because despite the police botching the collection, that tiny DNA fragment is still perfectly objective. Unlike a witness whose memory fades or neighbors who play the three monkeys, DNA just doesn't forget.
It doesn't. But the chilling reality of this case is that the perpetrator has lived a parallel life alongside society for over a quarter of a century.
That is a terrifying thought.
They have watched the world modernize. They know exactly what they left behind in that apartment in Fulya.
They've had to live with the silent, ticking terror of a knock on the door every single day. They know their biological barcode, however fragmented, is sitting in a lab, just waiting for them to make one mistake.
The burden of the Feli Mashul is heavy. The perpetrator is unknown to the law, but they are fully known to themselves. They carry the absolute knowledge of what they did to a 15-year-old girl in her own home.
But justice is entirely dependent on intersection. The killer's path must eventually cross with the forensic database, and until that precise intersection occurs, the truth remains trapped in that tiny, mishandled fragment of DNA.
It does.
So why does a 26-year-old unsolved case matter to you listening to this today? Why do we keep analyzing these timelines and these agonizing police failures?
Because it forces us to confront the fragility of our own safe spaces.
Exactly. Today, we've walked through the devastating chronology of June 5, 2000. We look at a teenager returning from school whose ultimate sanctuary was violated by a comfortable, unseen attacker.
We examined the harsh reality of forensic science. How the microscopic witness Çağla, bravely secured in her final moments, was nearly destroyed by poor police work, being clipped in a living room instead of an autopsy suite.
And we explored the monumental weight of a decades-long investigation that has cleared thousands, exhausted a system, and left a community forever altered.
Still demanding justice after all these years.
Right. I want to leave you with one final, haunting thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. That microscopic fragment of DNA isn't just a piece of forensic evidence. It is a biological time capsule, perfectly frozen since that sunny afternoon in 2000.
It really is.
It knows the killer's face. It is known for 26 years. It's silently waiting for the exact day that science, persistence, and perhaps a stroke of luck finally align. It makes you wonder, what happens to a society when the ultimate truth is locked inside a single microscopic drop of DNA, just waiting for the right moment to finally speak?
It reminds us that while justice can definitely be delayed, the truth never actually disappears.
It doesn't. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and please never forget the very real human stories that beat at the heart of these mysteries. Until next time.
Sonra gidip de evi de temizlemişim de.
Botları oraya sakladı. Botları düşündü ve botların bir tanesinin ucu
Kan
yırtık,
içindeymiş
bayağı
o
bir
da.
yırtık.
Dolayısıyla o
Kameralardan da bu
dönemlerde
tespit
de
edildi.
Bilmiyorum
Misal.
süreç içerisinde gerçi
İnanın
25
mesela
yıla
topluma
Yok
yayılmış
gelmeyen-
efendim, çekilirken
Yolda
sanıyorum.
araçta
Şey,
çalışıyorsan-
el birliği var.
Maalesef bu tarz olaylar var mı?
Anlayamadım.